John Mitchell led an ordinary life in the quaint, unassuming town of Riverton, nestled in the heartland of America. His days followed a predictable rhythm: work, home, and the occasional weekend outing with his wife, Emily. John was a diligent accountant at a local firm, a job that, while stable, did not offer much excitement. Emily, on the other hand, worked as a kindergarten teacher, bringing warmth and laughter to her young students each day. They lived comfortably, but their lives were far from luxurious. Their modest home reflected their practical lifestyle, a cozy, three-bedroom house with a small yard and a white picket fence that bordered a quiet street. One evening, as the waning daylight gave way to the artificial glow of the television, John found himself sinking into the worn cushions of their living room sofa. The rhythmic bounce of a basketball and the din of the crowd filled the room as he watched the local NBA team compete in a high-stakes game. Emily was busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and the comforting aroma of garlic and herbs mingled with the excitement of the game. John's mind wandered, his gaze occasionally drifting to the small stack of bills on the coffee table, a reminder of the routine financial worries that accompanied their everyday life. It was during one of these idle moments that John's thoughts turned to the lottery. The idea of winning had always seemed distant, almost whimsical, like a daydream rather than a real possibility. He had played the lottery before, but only sporadically, buying a ticket here and there, never with any serious expectation of winning. It was more of a harmless indulgence, a fleeting hope that somehow, against the odds, he might strike it rich. As the game continued to unfold, John's gaze fell upon a lottery advertisement that flashed briefly across the screen during a commercial break. The jackpot for that week's Mega Millions was at an unprecedented high, an amount that was hard to ignore. The number flashed across the screen, a staggering $150 million. For a moment, John felt a pang of longing. He couldn't help but imagine the possibilities, traveling the world, upgrading their home, and living without the constant financial strain that marked their daily existence. As the thought lingered, John decided to take a chance. It was a spontaneous decision, driven by a blend of curiosity and a rare spark of excitement. He excused himself from the sofa and headed towards the door. "I'm going to grab a lottery ticket," he called out to Emily, who was engrossed in stirring a pot on the stove. Emily glanced up with a smile, barely registering his words. "Sure, go ahead," she replied, her attention returning to the simmering pot. "Don't be too long, dinner's almost ready." John nodded and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The convenience store at the corner of their street was only a short walk away. As he strolled down the familiar sidewalk, he found himself contemplating the improbability of winning. The thought was almost amusing, an entertaining distraction from the monotony of everyday life. When he reached the store, he joined the small queue at the lottery counter. The clerk behind the counter, a young woman with a friendly demeanor, greeted him with a nod. John felt a momentary twinge of self-consciousness, as if he were about to undertake some grand, albeit futile, gamble. Nevertheless, he approached the counter and asked for a Mega Millions ticket. The clerk processed his request with practiced efficiency, handing him a small, printed slip of paper with a series of numbers. John accepted it with a half-hearted smile and slipped it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said, before heading back home. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully. John and Emily enjoyed a simple dinner, their conversation revolving around mundane topics like work and upcoming weekend plans. John placed the lottery ticket on the kitchen table, near the stack of mail, and promptly forgot about it. The excitement of buying the ticket quickly faded, and the prospect of winning seemed as distant as before. Days rolled into a familiar routine. John's life continued as it always had: work, home, and occasional moments of respite. The lottery ticket lay forgotten on the kitchen table, gradually becoming a mere piece of paper amidst the clutter. John's thoughts rarely returned to the lottery, and the dream of striking it rich seemed to slip into the background of his life. Then, one Saturday morning, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, John found himself with a rare moment of free time. He decided to check the lottery numbers, a task he had almost completely forgotten. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, he settled into a chair at the kitchen table and turned on the television. The lottery results were about to be announced, and he felt a fleeting curiosity about whether he had won anything. As the announcer began to reveal the winning numbers, John's attention was caught. He watched with mild interest, not expecting anything extraordinary. But as the numbers were called out one by one, something remarkable happened. John's heart raced as he realized that the numbers on his ticket matched those being announced on the screen. The initial disbelief was overwhelming. John sat frozen, staring at the screen, his mind struggling to process the surreal reality of what was happening. It felt like a scene from a movie, a dramatic twist that was difficult to comprehend. He glanced at the ticket lying on the table, then back at the television. The numbers lined up perfectly. He had won the jackpot, a staggering $150 million. John's mind raced with a flurry of thoughts and emotions. The sheer magnitude of the prize left him breathless. He could hardly believe that the life-altering sum was now his. For a brief moment, he was filled with euphoria, imagining the possibilities that lay before him. But as quickly as the excitement came, it was overshadowed by a creeping anxiety. The first realization that struck John was the need to keep the win a secret. The prospect of sharing such an immense fortune with Emily was not something he was ready to consider. The idea of revealing the truth filled him with dread. He knew that this sudden change in their lives would not only disrupt their routine but could also lead to complications he was not prepared to handle. John's mind whirled with plans and strategies. He understood that maintaining the secrecy of his newfound wealth would require meticulous planning and careful execution. The enormity of the prize demanded discretion, and he was acutely aware of the potential consequences of his actions. He began to consider how to navigate this unexpected turn of events. John realized that he would need to create a facade of normalcy while keeping his financial windfall hidden. He was determined to ensure that Emily, and anyone else, remained oblivious to the truth. The prospect of living a double life seemed daunting, but John was resolute in his decision to keep the fortune to himself. With a deep breath and a steely resolve, John set about formulating his plan. He knew that he had to act swiftly and with precision to keep the secret intact. Every action, every decision from this point forward, would need to be calculated to avoid arousing suspicion. The road ahead was uncertain, but John was prepared to navigate it with caution, determined to protect his newfound fortune and maintain his ordinary life. John Mitchell's heart raced with every beat as he awoke the following morning. The euphoria from discovering his lottery win had transformed into a heavy burden of secrecy. As the sun cast its early light through the bedroom window, John lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind buzzing with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Today was crucial. It was the day he would begin executing his carefully crafted plan to keep the lottery winnings a secret from Emily. He slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to disturb Emily, who was still fast asleep. The serene morning light illuminated the room, but John felt a stark contrast between the peaceful scene and the tumultuous storm of thoughts in his mind. His fingers fumbled as he dressed, the weight of the lottery ticket feeling like a leaden anchor in his pocket. John's first task was to claim his prize discreetly. The lottery office where he had purchased the ticket was located a few miles away, and he knew that acting quickly and with precision was imperative. After a hasty breakfast, which he barely tasted, John grabbed his car keys and headed out the door. The drive was a blur of unease. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white, as he mentally rehearsed the steps he would need to follow. The lottery office was a small, nondescript building nestled between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. As John pulled into the parking lot, he took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The place was surprisingly quiet, with only a few cars parked outside. He wondered if this was a sign of good fortune or just an ordinary day. He hoped it was the former. John parked his car and walked briskly to the entrance, his footsteps echoing with each step he took. The cool morning air did little to soothe his anxiety. He entered the office, and a bell chimed softly, announcing his arrival. The interior was sparsely decorated, with a few lottery posters and informational pamphlets scattered about. A counter separated the public from the small office space behind it, where two lottery officials were busy at their desks. One of the officials, a middle-aged man with a friendly face and a calm demeanor, looked up from his work and greeted John. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" John swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm here to claim a lottery prize," he managed to say, his voice trembling slightly. The official's eyes brightened with interest. "Congratulations. May I see your ticket, please?" John's hand shook as he produced the ticket from his pocket and handed it over. The official took the ticket and examined it carefully, his expression shifting to one of surprise and then delight. "Well, it looks like you've won the jackpot." "That's fantastic." John tried to muster a smile, though his nerves were frayed. "Yes, I guess I did." The official nodded, motioning for John to take a seat in the small waiting area. "We'll need to process some paperwork and verify your identity. This will take a little time, but I assure you, everything will be handled discreetly." As John sat down, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The realization that he was on the brink of a life-changing fortune was both exhilarating and terrifying. He knew that maintaining the secrecy of his win required utmost care. The official returned shortly with a stack of forms and a clipboard. "We'll start with the paperwork. I'll need you to fill out these forms and provide some identification." John complied, his hands moving mechanically as he completed the forms. He answered questions about his personal details and provided copies of his identification documents. Every answer, every signature, felt like a step closer to solidifying his plan. The official chatted amiably throughout the process, but John's responses were brief and distracted. His mind was occupied with strategies and contingencies. Once the paperwork was completed, John was presented with a choice: to receive his winnings in a lump sum payment or in annuity payments spread over several years. John had anticipated this decision and had already decided that the lump sum was the most practical option. While he understood that opting for a lump sum meant a substantial tax deduction, it also meant he would have immediate access to the majority of the money. This was crucial for his plan to remain undisclosed. After a brief consultation with a financial advisor, who explained the implications of both options, John confirmed his choice. The advisor's tone was professional and detached, but John felt a pang of unease as he signed the necessary documents. The advisor handed him a check for the lump sum amount, minus taxes, a figure that was still staggering. John left the lottery office with the check securely tucked in his wallet, a mixture of triumph and apprehension swirling inside him. As he drove back home, he could hardly contain his thoughts. The check represented not just money but a future filled with possibilities, and yet, it also symbolized the beginning of a high-stakes deception. To maintain the illusion of normalcy, John decided to adhere to his usual routine. He returned to work as if nothing had changed. His co-workers greeted him with their usual banter, and John responded with a practiced ease. He was careful not to let any hint of his recent windfall slip through. Despite the enormous sum now at his disposal, John kept his demeanor unaltered, meticulously avoiding any behavior that might draw attention. Throughout the day, John's mind was a whirlwind of schemes and strategies. He needed to find ways to manage his newfound wealth discreetly. He considered opening a separate bank account under a false name to handle the bulk of the money, ensuring that it remained hidden from prying eyes. Additionally, John planned to make gradual improvements to his lifestyle, subtle changes that would not immediately arouse suspicion but would nonetheless enhance his quality of life. At home that evening, John maintained the facade of normalcy. Emily was as cheerful as ever, discussing her day at school and making plans for their weekend. John listened attentively, nodding and engaging in conversation, all while keeping his thoughts firmly focused on the intricate web of deception he was weaving. As he lay in bed that night, John's mind continued to race. He knew that the path he had chosen was fraught with challenges. The success of his scheme depended on his ability to remain vigilant and composed. Every action, every word, would need to be carefully calculated to avoid raising suspicion. The stakes were high, and the consequences of failure were unimaginable. John resolved to keep his secret at all costs. The weight of the lottery win was immense, but the challenge of maintaining the illusion of an ordinary life was equally daunting. With determination and a resolve to protect his newfound fortune, John prepared himself for the complexities that lay ahead. The days that followed were marked by a careful balancing act. John continued to work diligently, maintaining his usual routine while managing the logistics of his secret. The thrill of his new financial status was tempered by the constant vigilance required to keep it concealed. Each day brought new challenges and decisions, and John navigated them with a blend of caution and strategic planning. John's scheme was in full motion, and as he continued to weave his web of secrecy, he was acutely aware of the delicate balance he needed to maintain. The stakes were high, and the future remained uncertain. But for now, John was focused on the task at hand, determined to safeguard his extraordinary stroke of luck while preserving the semblance of his ordinary life. John Mitchell's life had been a careful choreography of normalcy ever since he claimed his lottery winnings. Each day had passed with a meticulous balance between routine and secrecy, and he had become adept at navigating the complex web he had spun. Yet, as the weeks wore on, maintaining the pretense of an ordinary life began to weigh heavily on him. His days at work were filled with routine tasks and mundane conversations, all of which he navigated with a practiced ease. But John could not ignore the ever-present undercurrent of tension. The lottery winnings, though a source of immense personal fortune, had become a heavy burden of deceit. He felt increasingly anxious about the elaborate scheme he had devised and worried about the potential pitfalls that could expose his secret. One evening, as John and Emily sat in their cozy living room, the gentle hum of the television provided a backdrop to their conversation. Emily was enthusiastic as she shared stories from her day at school, her animated voice a stark contrast to John's increasingly subdued demeanor. "John, did I tell you about the new teaching methods we're implementing? They're really exciting," Emily said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. John forced a smile, nodding in agreement. "That sounds wonderful, Emily. I'm glad you're so passionate about your work." Emily's enthusiasm seemed endless, and John admired her dedication. Yet, he found himself struggling to remain engaged, his thoughts consumed by the complexities of his situation. He knew he had to find ways to use his newfound wealth while ensuring that Emily remained oblivious. As the weeks passed, John began to make subtle changes to their lifestyle. He indulged in minor upgrades around the house, new furniture, updated appliances, and a few luxurious touches that were meant to be seen as simple improvements. He justified these expenses as investments in their home, but each purchase was carefully planned to avoid arousing Emily's suspicions. One Saturday afternoon, John decided to take Emily out for a surprise dinner at an upscale restaurant he had been eyeing for months. It was his way of demonstrating that he was still the same attentive husband, despite the changes that were gradually occurring in their lives. The restaurant was elegant, with dim lighting and a sophisticated ambience that spoke of refinement. Emily was delighted by the surprise, her eyes widening as she took in the opulent surroundings. "This place is amazing, John. I didn't even know you knew about it." John smiled, trying to mask the underlying anxiety he felt. "I thought it would be nice to treat you to a special evening." Throughout the dinner, Emily was blissfully unaware of the underlying motives behind John's gesture. She reveled in the luxurious setting and the exquisite cuisine, while John focused on maintaining his composure and observing her reactions. The evening was a success, and Emily was appreciative of the thoughtful surprise. Despite the apparent success of his efforts, John was increasingly troubled by the complexity of his situation. The constant need to manage and conceal his newfound wealth was beginning to take its toll. He found himself growing more irritable and withdrawn, his mind preoccupied with the potential consequences of his deceit. One evening, as John was alone in his study, he received a phone call from an old friend, Mark, who had recently moved to a neighboring city. Mark had always been a close confidant, and John found himself tempted to share his secret with him. However, he knew that divulging such sensitive information to anyone could jeopardize his carefully constructed scheme. "Hey, John. It's been a while. How are things?" Mark's voice was cheerful and familiar. John hesitated before responding. "Hey, Mark. Things are, well, pretty much the same. How about you?" Mark's enthusiasm was palpable. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it. I've been doing some great things here, and I wanted to catch up. We should definitely get together soon." John felt a pang of guilt. Mark had been a supportive friend, and the thought of keeping such a significant part of his life hidden from him was weighing on him. But John remained resolute, knowing that any slip of the tongue could unravel his entire plan. As the weeks turned into months, John's anxiety grew. The need to keep up appearances became increasingly challenging, and he found himself struggling to maintain the facade of a normal life. The pressure to hide his wealth was compounded by the constant fear of discovery, and John began to question whether the rewards of his deception were worth the stress and uncertainty. One particularly challenging day, John came home from work to find Emily sitting at the kitchen table with a serious expression on her face. She had a stack of bills and documents spread out before her, and John could sense that something was amiss. "John, we need to talk," Emily said, her voice tinged with concern. John's heart skipped a beat. He took a seat across from her, trying to remain calm. "What's going on?" Emily looked troubled as she gestured to the documents. "I've been going over our finances, and I'm worried about some discrepancies. There are expenses here that don't quite add up, and I'm not sure where the extra money is coming from." John's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plausible explanation. The last thing he wanted was for Emily to question their financial situation. He knew he had to handle this situation with care to avoid raising further suspicion. "I'm not sure what you're seeing," John said, trying to sound as reassuring as possible. "Maybe there's been a mistake. I'll take a look at it and see if I can figure it out." Emily seemed to accept his explanation for the moment, though her concern lingered. John spent the rest of the evening poring over the financial documents, making sure that any discrepancies were explained away in a way that would not raise further questions. The encounter left John feeling more anxious than ever. The pressure of maintaining his secret was taking a toll on him, and he began to wonder if the stress was worth the rewards. The fear of discovery was constant, and John realized that the complexity of his situation was growing beyond his control. As he lay in bed that night, John couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The weight of his deception felt heavier than ever, and he found himself grappling with doubts and fears. The path he had chosen was fraught with challenges, and the consequences of failure were looming large in his mind. John's scheme had brought him financial success but had also introduced a host of complications that he had not anticipated. The dilemma of maintaining secrecy while managing his newfound wealth was becoming increasingly overwhelming. As he drifted off to sleep, John wondered if he could continue to navigate the delicate balance of his life, or if the truth would inevitably come to light. The days continued to blend into one another for John Mitchell as he navigated the complex life he had crafted. His determination to maintain the illusion of an ordinary existence was unwavering, but the weight of his deception was beginning to take its toll. The pressure of hiding his newfound wealth was mounting, and John found himself increasingly on edge. One crisp autumn morning, John was at his desk, immersed in his work, when he heard the sound of the doorbell echoing through the house. It was unusual for anyone to visit at this time, and John felt a flicker of anxiety. He glanced at his watch and decided to answer the door himself, hoping to avoid any potential complications. When John opened the door, he was taken aback to see Mark, his old friend, standing on the doorstep. Mark's face lit up with a friendly smile, and he extended his hand in greeting. "John. It's great to see you. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." John's heart raced as he forced a smile. "Mark, what a surprise. Come on in." Mark stepped inside, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Your place looks fantastic, John. I've heard a lot about your new ventures. I hope everything is going well." John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been hoping to avoid revealing anything about his recent changes, but Mark's unexpected visit had thrown a wrench into his carefully orchestrated plans. "Everything's fine. It's been busy, but we're managing." Mark settled into the living room, and John offered him a drink. As they chatted about old times and caught up on each other's lives, John couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Mark's presence was a stark reminder of the web of lies John had woven, and he struggled to keep the conversation light and inconsequential. "So, what brings you here?" John asked, trying to steer the conversation away from sensitive topics. Mark took a sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair. "I was in town for some business and thought I'd drop by. I've been meaning to catch up with you for ages. Plus, I heard about a new investment opportunity that I thought might interest you." John's mind raced as he tried to keep his composure. The thought of discussing financial matters with Mark was both tempting and dangerous. "Investment opportunity? Tell me more." Mark's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he outlined the details of the investment. It was a lucrative deal involving real estate, and Mark was eager to share his insights. John listened attentively, trying to gauge whether the conversation could be used to his advantage or if it would only add to his mounting stress. As the discussion progressed, John found himself increasingly torn. On one hand, the investment opportunity was tempting and could provide a plausible excuse for any sudden changes in his financial situation. On the other hand, discussing financial matters with Mark could jeopardize the secrecy he had worked so hard to maintain. Mark's visit stretched into the afternoon, and John found himself growing more anxious with each passing hour. The weight of his deception felt heavier than ever, and the pressure to keep his secret was beginning to take a toll on him. He couldn't help but wonder if his elaborate scheme was unraveling. Eventually, Mark took his leave, promising to stay in touch and to discuss the investment opportunity further. John thanked him for the visit, watching as his old friend departed with a wave and a smile. As the door closed behind him, John slumped into a chair, feeling a profound sense of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. The encounter with Mark had left John feeling unsettled. The conversation about the investment opportunity had planted seeds of doubt in his mind, and he was left grappling with the implications of his choices. The pressure to maintain the illusion of normalcy while managing his newfound wealth was becoming increasingly challenging. As evening fell, John attempted to unwind with Emily, who was in high spirits after a productive day at work. She chatted animatedly about her students and her plans for the coming weeks, her enthusiasm a stark contrast to John's growing sense of dread. "John, are you okay? You seem a bit off tonight," Emily observed, her concern evident. John forced a smile and took her hand. "I'm just a bit tired, that's all. It's been a long day." Emily seemed to accept his explanation, though John could tell she was still worried. He vowed to himself to keep his worries hidden and to focus on maintaining the facade of a normal life. Later that night, as John lay in bed, his mind raced with thoughts of Mark's visit and the investment opportunity. He felt a pang of regret over the secrets he had kept from his friend and the increasingly complex web of deception he had woven. John's internal struggle continued as he contemplated the future. The lottery winnings had provided him with financial security, but they had also introduced a host of complications and challenges. He found himself questioning whether the rewards of his deception were worth the stress and uncertainty that accompanied them. As he drifted off to sleep, John's thoughts were filled with a mixture of anxiety and doubt. The path he had chosen was fraught with risks, and the consequences of his actions loomed large in his mind. John wondered if he could continue to navigate the delicate balance of his life or if the truth would eventually come to light. The unexpected visit from Mark had highlighted the fragility of John's carefully constructed facade. As he faced the challenges of maintaining secrecy and managing his newfound wealth, John knew that he had to remain vigilant and resourceful. The future was uncertain, and John's journey was far from over. John's life, shrouded in secrecy, seemed to be on a steady course. His clandestine wealth was perfectly hidden, and Emily had no inkling of the life-altering fortune he had come into. John had become adept at maintaining his double life, savoring his unshared wealth while keeping up appearances with Emily. One crisp autumn morning, as John sipped his coffee and leafed through the newspaper, a headline caught his eye. It was an article about a local charity auction that was about to take place. The auction was notable for its high-profile items and prominent guests. The auctioneer, a well-known philanthropist, was famous for his connections to the elite, and the article mentioned that the event would feature a rare collection of vintage wines and an exclusive art piece donated by a mysterious benefactor. John's heart skipped a beat when he saw the name of the auction's mysterious donor. It was someone he had never met personally but was closely connected to the financial world, an old business associate from his firm. The name triggered a memory of a past disagreement they had. He had a fleeting thought that this connection could potentially pose a risk to his secret. As the auction date approached, John couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He decided to attend the event, partly to check if there were any potential risks and partly out of sheer curiosity. He crafted a plan to keep his presence discreet while maintaining his cover. The night of the auction arrived, and John donned a sharp suit, blending in with the well-dressed crowd. Emily, busy with her own commitments, stayed home, leaving John to navigate the social labyrinth alone. As he entered the elegantly decorated hall, he marveled at the opulence around him. The ambience was sophisticated, with soft classical music and the clinking of glasses. John maneuvered through the crowd, keeping a keen eye on his surroundings. He noticed that many of the attendees were discussing high-profile investments and the recent lottery winner who had been all over the news. It was an odd coincidence that John's secret was being talked about so openly. Amidst the crowd, John's anxiety increased when he spotted the auctioneer, who was engaged in conversation with a woman wearing a striking red dress. Her demeanor was confident, and she had an air of authority about her. The auctioneer's gestures were animated, and John caught snippets of their conversation, which mentioned the anonymous benefactor and safeguarding the secret. Curiosity piqued, John decided to approach the duo subtly. He engaged in small talk, trying to gauge their intentions. The conversation revealed that the mysterious donor had requested absolute confidentiality regarding their identity, making John more on edge. The auctioneer mentioned that they had done a background check and that the donor's financial status was extraordinarily secure. John's pulse quickened. He had been meticulous in hiding his wealth, but if anyone connected the dots between the donor's financial security and his own secret, his world could unravel. He needed to act quickly to ensure his identity remained concealed. As John contemplated his next move, the evening took an unexpected turn. The woman in red approached him, her gaze piercing through the crowd. She introduced herself as Clara, a private investigator hired by an undisclosed client. Her presence immediately set off alarm bells in John's mind. Clara was charming yet unnervingly perceptive. She seemed to know more about the guests than she let on and had a way of asking probing questions without appearing intrusive. John's attempts to divert the conversation were futile. Clara's intuition seemed almost uncanny. As the night progressed, John noticed Clara keeping a close eye on him. Her inquiries about his background and connections were unsettling. He realized that her presence was more than a mere coincidence, it was part of a larger, more complex scheme. His anxiety escalated, and he wondered if his secret had already been compromised. When the auction began, John tried to focus on the event, but Clara's continued scrutiny was a constant distraction. The high-profile items were bid on fiercely, but John's mind was preoccupied with the possibility of his secret being exposed. Finally, as the auction neared its end, John decided to confront Clara discreetly. He approached her under the pretense of discussing a charity donation, hoping to gauge her intentions. Clara's demeanor was polite but guarded, and she mentioned that she was investigating a financial discrepancy linked to anonymous donations. Her cryptic remarks about financial irregularities made John's heart race. Before John could respond, the auctioneer announced a surprise addition to the evening's events, a live reveal of the anonymous benefactor's identity. The crowd murmured with anticipation, and John's stomach churned. He realized that the evening's unexpected twist was not just a part of the auction but potentially a threat to his carefully guarded secret. As the announcement approached, John's mind raced. His worst fears seemed to be coming true. He had always been cautious, but this was an unprecedented level of scrutiny. The reveal promised to unmask the mysterious donor, and John's heart pounded with trepidation. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight focused on the stage. The auctioneer prepared to reveal the benefactor's identity. John's breath hitched, and he braced himself for the worst. The audience held its collective breath as the auctioneer began the dramatic disclosure. In a surprising twist, the auctioneer announced that the benefactor's identity would remain a mystery, citing a last-minute change of heart. The crowd reacted with a mix of relief and disappointment. The decision to keep the benefactor's identity concealed was attributed to new developments in the investigation, which were being kept confidential. John's heart raced with mixed emotions. Relief washed over him, but the evening had left him more anxious than ever. He was faced with an unnerving realization that the situation was far from over. Clara's presence and the unexpected twist in the auction revealed that his secret was precariously balanced, and he needed to tread carefully to protect his newfound fortune. As John left the auction, the night air felt colder, and the uncertainty of his situation weighed heavily on him. He knew that maintaining his secret would be increasingly challenging. The unexpected revelation at the auction had shifted the dynamics of his concealed life, and John's journey to keep his fortune hidden was far from over. The unexpected turn of events at the auction left John reeling. He had narrowly avoided exposure, but the close call heightened his paranoia. Clara's presence, coupled with the auctioneer's cryptic announcement, suggested that his secret was more vulnerable than he had ever imagined. The drive home felt longer than usual as John replayed the night's events in his mind. Once home, he was greeted by Emily's cheerful voice. She was in the kitchen, preparing a late-night snack. John forced a smile and kissed her on the cheek, trying to appear normal despite the turmoil inside him. Emily, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in John's mind, chatted about her day and their upcoming anniversary plans. As John listened, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Emily was devoted and loving, and he was keeping a monumental secret from her. But the lure of his unshared wealth was too strong, and he resolved to tighten his grip on the secret. The next morning, John woke up early, determined to take control of the situation. He needed to find out more about Clara and her investigation. Over breakfast, he casually asked Emily if she had ever heard of Clara, masking his true intentions behind a veil of curiosity. Emily shook her head, her expression puzzled. "No, why do you ask?" John shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just met her at the auction last night. Seemed like an interesting character." Emily nodded and returned to her meal, but John's mind was racing. He had to be careful not to arouse suspicion. After breakfast, he made an excuse about an urgent meeting at work and left the house. Instead of heading to the office, John drove to a secluded park, where he could make phone calls without being overheard. He contacted a private investigator named Max, a former colleague from his firm who now specialized in discreet inquiries. John explained the situation, omitting the lottery details, and asked Max to find out everything he could about Clara. Max agreed to take the case and promised to be thorough. John hung up, feeling a bit more at ease knowing that he had someone looking out for him. But he also knew that Max's investigation would take time, and he needed to stay vigilant. Over the next few days, John tried to go about his routine as usual, but his mind was constantly on edge. Every time the phone rang or a car slowed down near his house, his heart skipped a beat. He kept a close watch on his surroundings, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face. One evening, while working late in his home office, John received a call from Max. "I've got some information on Clara," Max said. She's a former journalist turned private investigator. She's known for digging deep and has a reputation for uncovering hidden truths. It seems she was hired by a client who suspects financial foul play linked to a recent anonymous donation. John's blood ran cold. The dots were connecting too closely to his secret. "Did you find out who hired her?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not yet, but I'm working on it. She's good at covering her tracks, but I'll get to the bottom of it," Max reassured him. After hanging up, John stared at his computer screen, lost in thought. Clara was digging into financial discrepancies, which likely pointed to his lottery winnings. He needed to divert her attention and throw her off his trail. The next morning, John decided to take a bold step. He contacted the charity auction's organizers and offered a significant donation, this time under a different alias. He wanted to create a false lead that would mislead Clara and anyone else investigating the anonymous donor. It was a risky move, but John was desperate to protect his secret. As he finalized the details of the donation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was only delaying the inevitable. The web of lies and deceit was becoming increasingly tangled, and John feared that one wrong move could unravel everything. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure of maintaining his double life took its toll on John. He became more withdrawn and irritable, which didn't go unnoticed by Emily. She tried to reach out to him, concerned about his behavior, but John brushed off her worries, blaming work stress. One evening, as John was going through some documents in his office, he received an unexpected visitor. Clara stood at his doorstep, her expression unreadable. John's heart raced as he invited her in, masking his panic with a polite smile. "I thought we could have a chat," Clara said, her eyes scanning the room. "I've been doing some research on the anonymous donation, and your name came up." John's mind raced. "I'm not sure why. I attended the auction, but that's about it." Clara nodded, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "I understand. But there are some financial transactions that seem to link back to you. I just wanted to clear things up." John forced a laugh. "I'm an accountant, Clara. Financial transactions are part of my job." Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. But these transactions are quite substantial. Just thought it was worth a conversation." John's palms were sweaty, but he maintained his composure. "I assure you, everything is above board." Clara stood up, her demeanor still polite but firm. "I hope so, John. Because if there's something you're hiding, it will come out eventually. Secrets have a way of doing that." As she left, John collapsed into his chair, his mind spinning. Clara's visit was a clear warning. She was onto him, and he needed to act fast. He decided to take drastic measures to ensure his secret remained buried. The stakes were higher than ever, and John knew that one misstep could cost him everything. That night, as John lay awake, he realized that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. His life had become a delicate balancing act, and the slightest wobble could send it crashing down. The unexpected revelation at the auction had set off a chain of events that he couldn't control, and John knew that the only way to survive was to stay one step ahead of everyone else. But as the shadows lengthened and the secrets deepened, John wondered if he could ever truly escape the consequences of his actions. The path he had chosen was fraught with danger, and the price of his deception was growing with each passing day. The days following Clara's visit were some of the most stressful John had ever experienced. Every interaction with Emily, every call from Max, and every shadow he saw out of the corner of his eye added to the mounting tension. He barely slept, and when he did, nightmares of being exposed jolted him awake. John's paranoia was reaching its peak when Max called with news that chilled him to the bone. "John, I've discovered something troubling. Clara has been meeting with someone who fits the description of your brother, Tim." John's stomach churned. Tim was a wild card, reckless and desperate for money. They hadn't spoken in years, but if Tim knew about the lottery, it would explain Clara's relentless pursuit. That evening, As John sat in his office, he received a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Hello. John, it's Tim. We need to talk." John's heart pounded. "Tim, what the hell is going on?" "We need to meet. Tomorrow, 9 p.m., at the old warehouse by the docks. And bring the money." The line went dead before John could respond. Panic surged through him. Tim was blackmailing him, and Clara was likely involved. John's carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse. The next day, John went through his routine in a daze, mechanically interacting with colleagues and clients while his mind raced with contingency plans. As night fell, he found himself at the docks, his car parked in the shadows of the abandoned warehouse. The wind whistled through the broken windows, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Tim stepped out of the darkness, a smug grin on his face. "Long time no see, brother." John gritted his teeth. "What do you want, Tim?" Tim chuckled. "You know exactly what I want. A cut of that lottery money. And Clara gets her story. Everyone wins." "You're out of your mind," John snapped. "You'll ruin both our lives." "Too late for that," Tim said, pulling out a phone. "Say hello to Clara." Clara's voice came through the speaker. "Hello, John. Quite the reunion, isn't it?" John clenched his fists. "What's your endgame, Clara?" "My endgame is the truth," Clara said coldly. "But I might be persuaded to keep quiet if the price is right." John's mind raced. He had to think fast. "Fine. I'll give you both what you want. But not here. Meet me at the bank tomorrow morning. We'll finalize everything there." Tim and Clara exchanged glances. "All right," Tim agreed. "But no tricks, John. We have everything we need to expose you." The next morning, John walked into the bank with a plan. He had made a decision that would change everything. He was done being manipulated and living in fear. As he entered the private meeting room, Tim and Clara were already there, waiting. "Good to see you kept your word," Tim said. John sat down, his face unreadable. "Let's get this over with." The banker brought in the necessary documents, and John began the transfer process. As he did, he looked up at Tim and Clara. "I hope you both know what you're doing." Tim smirked. "Don't worry about us. Just focus on signing those papers." With the final signatures in place, John leaned back, feeling a strange sense of calm. "It's done." Clara's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and smiled. "Good doing business with you, John." As Tim and Clara left the room, John made one final call. "It's done," he said simply. Later that evening, as John sat in his home office, the news broke. Tim and Clara had been arrested for conspiracy and blackmail. John had secretly recorded their entire conversation at the warehouse and handed it over to the authorities. He had also contacted a journalist, ensuring the story of Tim and Clara's scheme went public, discrediting any claims Clara might have made about the lottery winnings. Emily walked in, concern etched on her face. "John, what's going on?" "The news." John took her hands, looking into her eyes. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you." As he explained everything, his deception, the lottery, Tim's betrayal, Emily listened in stunned silence. When he finished, she didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "I don't know what to say, John. I feel so betrayed." John nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I just couldn't live with the lie anymore." Emily stood up, looking conflicted. "We need time, John. Time to heal and decide what comes next." John watched her leave the room, feeling the weight of his actions. He had lost everything he thought he was protecting. But as he sat in the quiet of his office, he realized that the truth, however painful, was the only way forward. For the first time in months, John felt a glimmer of hope. It would be a long road to redemption, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time.